Hello, Erica. You're my colleague and my friend. We went to ND school together, and you are in the midst of launching a new program called Reclaiming Your Feminine Energy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just came out today with a brand new webinar. Like you said, it's Reclaiming Your Sacred Feminine Energy. So I've got a masterclass up, and if people love this idea, there's also a whole 6-week program that I'm going to be running, all about reclaiming your feminine energy. So one of the things that I've noticed over the past 4 years specifically, I've been doing a lot of weight loss with my clients, and hormonal rebalancing has been something I've been doing for like a decade now. And there's this like core issue that I'm realizing is much deeper than the biochemistry itself, which is that a lot of us as women have been conditioned societally to act like men, especially in first world countries, especially in North America. And so what I've been seeing is no matter how much biochemical work I do or balancing work I do with a woman and her hormones, if she doesn't get to this core issue, the physical problems will still kick around. So the weight will still be a problem, the hair loss, the acne, whatever hormonal stuff she's facing, the infertility. That's primarily what I've been dealing with. And I know you see a lot of mental health clients and patients, and that too, though, like a lot of my clients have anxiety, depression, which is heavily related to being inauthentic for our whole lives or being trained to be a certain way and we don't even realize it. So that's basically what my webinar is speaking to, is how did this happen and how do we break out of it?
It's so interesting, and I think we're going to get a bit deeper with the definitions and the terms that you're talking about in terms of like the yin and yang of masculine and feminine energy. And in your webinar, actually, it's interesting because you go through the history of essentially human evolution, where you start with hunter-gatherer societies and how many of these societies were matriarchal and property was passed down from the female progeny. Because that was where the offspring of females is certain, right? Everybody knows who the kids of a woman are, whereas the fatherhood was uncertain in certain societies. And and you talk about the revelation of goddesses and how that's changed and how religions became monotheistic. So go with that.
Give us the 411. So I was in my undergrad degree, I minored in medical anthropology. So anthropology is really studying like, where humans come from and where are we going type of thing, and really looking at the transition of, we used to live in tribes and then we became societies, and then everything that's happened to us since then. So I guess what I could say to that is, from my point of view, and I can appreciate that not everyone will agree with this, because there's an ongoing academic battle forever between anthropologists and sociologists, and that's totally cool. But from a sociological point of view, people will say, that we choose our gender, which we do to a degree, in my opinion, but they'll look at it more from that perspective, whereas in anthropology, we look at it more from a biological basis. So evolutionary biology being the key piece for us in our point of view. So I really do believe that there is an underlying masculine and feminine energy, and I do believe it was shaped by biology. Men spending hundreds of thousands of years being the hunters, women spending hundreds of thousands of years being the gatherers. It's much different today, and that's a good thing, and we do have more choice. But I also think that I think I was telling you before, I'm super pregnant and super out of breath. I'm 35 weeks pregnant, so I'm very, very fat right now, and my diaphragm can't move. I'm like,
you're like, I'm clearing some heartburn, getting some breath. Yeah, it's okay, you can breathe.
Side note, this is my ADHD tangent kicking in. I took Gaviscon for the first time last night because I was dying and my midwife suggested it. And I was like, wow, drugs are amazing. I never use them, so I don't know how great they are until I do. But anyway, I can't breathe, so I'll keep trying to talk. I believe there is a biological basis. And what I really want to get at with that is, females, if you are a heterosexual female, you identify as female, you were born female, you have female hormones in a specific balance for your health. And trying to act like a man, take masculine, manly actions all of the time will actually lead to what I kept seeing in private practice was these women would show up with completely wrecked female hormones, almost like their body was trying to mimic the hormones of a man. So what I mean by that is, well, their adrenals were shot, so their cortisol was either through the roof or completely dead, which means they're highly stressed, and their progesterone and estrogen were tanking, and their testosterone was elevated. And usually I'd also see insulin and blood sugar issues too. So that's where I started really getting into this. And I do believe there's this biological way that we're meant to be if we're that type of woman that I've described. And I think trying to fit into the mold of being a man or acting like a man, which is what society has promoted to us, to hustle and grind and work really hard, then it leads to our body burning out because we're trying to mimic the hormones of a man, and it just doesn't suit female biology in the slightest.
Yeah, and this is sort of what you're referring to when you refer to this as inauthentic. It's trying to suppress our biology to embody or to be like something that isn't necessarily a natural evolution of what we would normally want. And I think, but you know, I mean, when we're talking about masculine, feminine, there's a difference between talking about those energies, masculine, feminine energies, and gender. And I think what your target market is female identifying biological women, so cisgendered women, heterosexual women. And so obviously, you know, there can be a male body can have more of a feminine gender identity. We all have masculine, feminine identities. Like even in psychoanalysis, when you think like Jungian psychoanalysis, we all have, the soul has masculine, feminine entities inside of it. And so what you're talking about is something very specific, but we're also talking about, you know, in nature, there's this dichotomy, this yin yang, masculine, feminine energy. And so for most biological women, the vast majority are going to identify as female. And then within that, how our society is sort of pushing the female identifying female bodies into more of a masculine energy. And that is changing our actual hormones and changing our mental health, our hormonal state, our health.
Yeah, exactly. And you touched on a really good thing, which is that it's a balance. So, you know, I'm talking about two different things. There's like biology, and then there's also the energetics of it. And I do personally think there's an overlap, but I get to that some people don't believe in the energetic side of things. So like you said, energetics, masculine, feminine, we all have a spectrum, like, you know, the masculine extreme and feminine extreme being on either end, and then something in the middle. Like the yin yang symbol, we all have yang within the yin, yin within the yang. Like males have mostly testosterone, but they still need estrogen. Females have mostly estrogen, progesterone, but we still need testosterone to function. So that's really important to know. And then there's also the piece about, it's really about, are you being authentic or not? Because there truly are people who may have been born female, but they identify so much more with a male biology, a male hormonal flow, male energetics. And this, what I'm saying, does not apply to them at all. I'm more so talking to the women who are trying to be something that they're not, which is the vast majority of young millennial women today, because we're taught to work really hard, just like in CCNM where we went to school. You know, don't sleep, have very little joy in your life, like spend a lot of time with grueling study and grueling work hours, graduate, hustle to be an entrepreneur. But the work of a man to go out and hunt and pursue and get the client is much different than the work of a woman, which is to do all the internal work, get the blocks out of our way, attract and magnetize clients to us through our way of being, as opposed to that sort of more vicious hunting energy, which works really well for men, maybe not as well for women, if that makes sense.
Like the female energy is more about reception, receiving. The male energy is more about penetration. It's like almost, yeah, it's almost extrapolated from the act of heterosexual sex, you know?
Yeah.
And so you started with talking about hunter-gatherer societies, and then what happened? So we had these sort of like classic biological roles, in essence, where the male energy was designed for hunting, the female energy designed for gathering. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you look at, and I think too, it depends on which tribe you're studying, because in a lot of cases there were more equal division of labor, and you saw more, like there was less of a differentiation in musculature or tone between males and females in certain tribes. Like sometimes females would be hunters as well. resources were shared more evenly as well. So that kind of, according to some anthropologists, at a certain point about 10,000 years ago, males started getting hold of more nutrition resources, and then they skyrocketed in being more developed muscularly than females. But I'll put that aside for a sec. You see, like a man or a hunter's energy is to go out and compartmentalize and be very linear, very logical, very focused, very concentrated. So like a man out hunting, he can't be in his emotional body too much because it'll throw him off his game. He can't be, you know, anywhere but the present moment, really focused, because he could get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And he's not thinking about what's going on at home. And this is very much how the masculine men I know still are to this day. Like, they go to work and they're at work. And it was a survivally based biological way of being. And then the women, on the other hand, were spending the whole day gathering. So gathering tubers, gathering small animals like tortoises and things for food. And they were with the children. And so women, I mean, we know from studies that our corpus callosum, connecting the two parts of the brain, is much thicker. Our whole brain can be involved. We don't compartmentalize as much. We're more holistic. We're much more emotional. That has a biological survival value to communicate with the children and other women. And even like modern anthropologists like Jared Diamond talks about, I think in his book, The Day After Tomorrow, he talks about how women are very responsible in tribes that still exist for the relationship side of things. So for gifting and getting gifts and maintaining relationships in a tribe, all that emotional intelligence fell into the female realm. And you still kind of see that to this day, right? Like, you still see, oh honey, we're going to this party, I bought your mother a gift, did you do this, you know, did you remember to call your sister about her birthday? Like, you still very much see that play out in modern dynamics too. So there's a little bit of that, you know, evolution of where we came from. And we spent 200 and, you know, the estimate is we were Homo sapiens for 200 to 300,000 years. So we usually say 250, let's call it in the middle. But 240,000 of those years, we lived that way. And only in the past 10,000 years have we lived as societies, which is a totally different structure. And that's where we started to see a real shift in the sexes, where you see this rise of patriarchy and suppression of women. And this is where a lot of our issues have come from. It's just the last, I don't know, what is that, like not even 1% of all of human existence has transpired in such a small amount of time. But it's had a huge impact on women in so many ways. And that's what I speak to in the webinar.
Right. It's like this industrialization. So even when we think of civilization, like ancient Chinese civilization or like irrigation systems, like the Mayans and Incas, this is like, we're talking about like industrialized society in the last couple hundred years. There's actually a quote, I was listening to a lecture, and there's a quote by psychoanalyst James Hillman, and he's talking about Aphrodite, the goddess, like sort of the death of the goddess and how industrialized societies killed the goddess. And so Aphrodite is the, you know, Venus is the goddess of love, fertility, sexuality. And he says, long hair is not allowed on the production line. It gets caught in the cogs. And so I think it was like perfect. It was like, yeah, there's this idea of sterilizing. And then he talks about deodorants that last into the evening, which suppress our pheromones and kind of hide that natural, freshly bathed, he says, musk, which is all about, you know, attraction and our natural hormones coming through that we're no longer smelling or interacting with. We are essentially sterilizing and androgenizing both the masculine and the feminine to become workers.
That's such a good way to put it. And I mean, there's so many, you know, people say my power is in my hair. There was that whole study they did, oh God, I can't remember the specifics, but they had taken, during some war, they hired the natives of the area who knew the forest so well to guide the military troops through the woods. And when they ended up converting them to like military troops as well, they cut off their hair, and they actually lost their ability to predict things in the forest. If you read this study, it's much more detailed than I'm doing it justice, but yeah, like your hair alone, it's one thing you alluded to. There's a sterility to chopping it off, either as a man or as a woman. And you lose, you know, those researchers are saying there's some intuition, there's some natural thing that gets lost, just like our smell gets lost, our natural pheromones and hormones get lost in the process of becoming a worker.
Right.
That's super interesting.
Well, yeah, it's like we have these, and I talk to my patients about this. We have these signals of vitality, right? And a lot of it comes down to fertility and reproduction, because especially for female bodies, cis female bodies, and female hormones, it's all about, I mean, so it's a big biological investment to become pregnant and to carry a baby and breastfeed a baby. And so our biology has really been geared towards being in tip-top health, you know, and so long hair, the right ratio of body fat, you know, hip to waist ratio, good skin, libido are all signals. They're all sort of these like icing on the cake of good health, because the body can invest in those things. Like our body doesn't care if we have nice hair. If we need to, if we're in survival mode, you're going to lose hair. Your body is not going to waste energy and precious proteins and ATP, like energy production, on building and growing and strengthening hair. And so hair is sort of this like extra thing, right? It's like getting new rims on your Mercedes. Like if you're in debt, you're not paying for that. You're paying back your debt. And so a lot of us are in this energy debt, in certain hormonal or even nutrients levels of starvation. And so if we're super stressed out, or like you said, living inauthentically, or pushing our bodies past a natural capacity, we're going to see these different hormonal symptoms that you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, that's when I first graduated from CCNM, I was mostly working with fertility cases, and like, who's the main woman I would see? She'd be highly stressed, strung out. When you ask her about her relationships, she's the man of the house. We were taught to be this way. She, demands where her husband be at what time. He's got to show up to these appointments. He's on a schedule to have sex with her. Like, everything's very calculated, precise. She has to be in control of everything. These are all masculine traits. And then as a result, she's working a lot. She's working 40 plus hours. She's a CEO. She's a president of a company. She's a business owner. She's climbing the ranks, maybe, highly successful on paper, but she is burnt out. And what she really wants is a family, and to be a wife and a mother, and to be in her feminine energy. But she shows up, like you said, without the lustrous hair, with the burnt out symptoms, with her physical health crumbling, lack of fertility, but also like the relational side, the emotional side are crumbling too. And I think a lot of us don't get that there's a basis to that we've been trained, like I was saying, to be a way that we're not meant to be. We're not meant to be in that highly stressed, super controlling state. And then it leads to this problem where all these people I was having couldn't get pregnant, or after that, it was mostly weight loss I worked with. They couldn't lose the weight, and they were trying to lose weight like a man would lose weight, and it just doesn't work for female hormones. So I find it really fascinating.
And that's a big one, right? Like the weight loss aspect of things, because intermittent fasting, and I talk about this a lot with patients, like you have to be really careful about intermittent fasting, keto diets, because again, the female hormonal system is about storage in order to invest in pregnancy and breastfeeding. And a male's reproductive system is viable until their last breath, right?
Yeah. I mean, their sperms are like 100 days old. Like, as long as they've been behaving in the past 100 days, they can make a baby.
And this is maybe not PC or appropriate for work, whatever. I don't even know the terms. But I think a lot of men die with erections. It's like the body's just like, we might spread the seed. We might keep the genes going. Obviously, for females' reproductive system, you need to have enough resources to carry a baby for 9 months. And then typically we would breastfeed for 5 years, right? And so the amount of resources you would need to have. And so a female body, when it's experiencing starvation, the first thing that drops is fertility, right? And so when a woman is
superfluous, right? You don't need that system to survive.
Right. And then often, the thyroid is like, oh, halt, because we need to preserve fat stores. And so the metabolism shifts in a different way. And we know that intermittent fasting, when they actually do study female rats or female humans, they see that there's this masculinization of the hormonal systems where there's more testosterone being produced, more cortisol. Whereas for men, everything's great. Their body fat declines, they feel really energized, they feel great, and women feel tired, their hair falls out, their skin. And so it's, you know, maybe temporarily and initially they feel good, but it doesn't work. The same systems and the same protocols don't work for women. And actually, like a lot of weight loss for women is about like sleeping more, resting more, you know, caring for their body more. And often it's not about focusing on weight loss at all. It's about focusing on health in general. And then the weight loss is this natural result of everything getting healthier, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like this program I'm launching is only my second one. I've been doing my Goddess Body program for the past 4 years. And it's just like you say, it's getting to the root of sleep and inflammation and all of these things. And then the emotional piece too. And yeah, like most women come in, like you said, they're putting their body through hell. Like they're going through intense keto diets, fasting a lot. I'm not saying those things don't have purpose in place for the right person at the right time, but for the majority of women that I was seeing, it was actually making things so much worse. And then they might have that short-term weight loss, but then the weight comes right back and it's like so resistant to anything after that. And that's how I got into it myself, was like I was acting like a man. I was trying to lose weight like a man. I was doing grueling personal training sessions 3 times a week for a year. I spent that's like over 10K to do that. And I still didn't, it just showed me my Facebook memory today of my starting weight and my ending weight with that trainer. I gained a pound in a year. And I know I put on muscle for sure, but my goal was to lose the baby weight and it still didn't come off and I didn't look any different. I was stronger, but I didn't look any different. So it's just kind of hilarious that that's coming up as a thing, as a memory today. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And one thing I'll say that I want to touch base on after is parental theory, because in psychology, the sex that has to bear the larger brunt of raising a child is the gender, the sex that gets to choose the partner. And so like you're alluding to, females have a much bigger investment to make biologically with being pregnant, carrying the pregnancy, birthing, breastfeeding for 5 years in a tribal society or group. So that very much feeds into masculine, feminine dynamics. The females therefore get to be the chooser because they want to choose someone that is going to really contribute to their lives. So that feeds into these energetics as well, is that women should be the receptive ones. We should be receiving suitors. We should be receiving clients, receiving energy from the universe. We're not the ones to go out and hunt. That's just like peacocks. The male's job is to look good and perform and show off, and our job is to receive or reject, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's the female selection pressure. Like it's
yes, precisely.
The feminine energy, which we talked about, could be different from gender, could be different from actual biological sex, but the feminine energy is one of selection. And even in, I think, myth, through cultures, there's this femininity to nature, which is also a selective energy, right? Like nature can be pretty brutal. With the way it selects for certain genetic traits and properties. And so the female energy is ultimately like decides, and this is pretty rough, it decides whose genes are going to go through. It's like this man, not this man, you know? And then nature is helping to hone in on what is desirable in terms of genetic traits and all these different things. And this is getting into like the woods with that. But can you talk about what feminine energy is? Like, what does it mean to be in one's feminine energy? Because we talked about the masculine energies, like in the head, the planning, the control, civilization, the rigidity, the structure. Like we're talking essentially of the patriarchy, right? We're talking about, and the patriarchy and this is the point, the patriarchy can be created and I can't even think of the word. The proponents of the patriarchy can be women, right? You can have the general of the army is a woman. And it doesn't mean that the army now is all of a sudden feminine or right. Good for women necessarily, you know?
Well, I think the best way to control a people is to make them self-police, right? And so you'll see now a lot of people talk about this on social media, that the most anti-feminist people are sometimes feminists. So what I mean by that is, like, say the women that raised me, some of them, they very much promoted equality and women should be equal, and you know, women should have choice and freedom. But they're the same women that the minute I want to make a choice to have a child are shooting down that choice and wanting to control me. Or the same women that when I speak up too loudly about a topic that I'm passionate about, they're like, don't talk about that on social media, you'll get in trouble. It's not a man telling me this, it's other women who strongly identify as feminists. So that's just an important kind of to connect to what you're saying. It's important to note that I think when I say they, I guess society for the past 10,000 years, they've programmed us to self-police. And you'll notice that, you know, that saying, if you want to stick your head up above the rest of the sunflowers, you're noticeable, they're going to come chop you down. Anytime you do that, the people that speak up the most, whether it's colleagues, friends, family, it's people that I know that identify very strongly as feminists. And that's really sad to me, because it's gone to us on such, the patriarchal way of being has gone to us on such a deep level that we're using it against each other instead of promoting a healing of what's been happening, if that makes sense.
Like essentially what you're saying is that part of what feminism is for every woman to access her own inner desires and to live those out and to have choice in how she wants to live, be, identify, dress, her sexuality, her you know, her family structure, whatever she wants. And it's not really we shouldn't be judging. And I don't want this conversation also to sound like we're judging women who are in their masculine energy, because for, like you said, for some women that is appropriate, right? For women, female people, women, female identifying or male identifying people in female bodies, however, whatever the spectrum, you know, the individual. But yeah, it's interesting, right? How we can be, women can be bringing other women down in this idea of policing, and this is how you should be as a feminist, or, you know.
I'm pretty sure the definition is just, we want the equal rights of men. And when you look at it that way, we want the choice that men have over their bodies, over their whatever it is, their jobs. But it's just, I find it so funny that, like, when I chose to not be on birth control pills anymore, all of my feminist relatives, because the birth control pill was very, very imperative in the 60s for us and for our freedoms, they judged me harshly for not wanting to be on the pill. Wanting to have children at a younger age, I was judged somewhat harshly for that. So feminism is not about trying to be more like men, but that's what happened in the second wave of feminism, is that we got this idea in our heads that it means trying to be like a man. No, it means having equal rights as men, but it doesn't mean we have to emulate it. You know, there's a freedom that we should have. But it just interests me that, and my heart breaks too, because these are our mothers, our aunts, our grandmothers, and my heart breaks for them that they fought so hard for us and for us to have that equality, but they don't feel it at a psychological level, if that makes sense. They still feel very trapped, and it's apparent when they make these projectional comments like that to millennial women, who I think can come across as threatening because we have these freedoms. And I think they have some jealousy that we were born into less of a restriction than they were, if that makes sense.
Right. Like, yeah, we're like internalizing almost the patriarchy, and then we're projecting it onto other women and just perpetuating the whole cycle.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, we became a rebellion, and then to be in the rebellion in the 60s meant to cut your hair short, be on the pill, get a masculine job, a job a man would have, and that's fine, you can still do that. But then, and you know, just be the man of the household, wear the pants, make all the decisions. And then they see their daughters wanting something new, wanting something different, wanting something more balanced. And then they're judging us about that, or they're mad at us about that. And I believe they're a little bit jealous. And I don't think that that's wrong. I think, you know, it's hard to be so suppressed and then see your kids be not that suppressed. And you think, well, I've had to live with good girl syndrome my whole life. I've had to live as a people pleaser my whole life. Why does she get to not be that way? So it's this sort of, their higher self wants us to win and succeed, but their human self, I think, can get trapped in this land of maybe lower emotions, lower vibe emotions, if that makes sense.
It's like, or also, I think in your webinar as well, you acknowledge that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we wouldn't have the freedom to return to balance if it wasn't for this hard push for equality and for a lot of the rights. And, you know, and a lot of the initiatives that happened in the 60s and beyond, the second wave of feminism. So it's like we do want to acknowledge their efforts and how they had to like stray so far into this really stressed out, overachieving mindset in order to have a lot of the freedoms that we have. So yeah.
Yeah, like, and I do believe, you know, if we continue to heal, it gives us an opportunity to go back and heal them. Like, they can seek healing through our development, because now we get to choose. Maybe I want to be a stay-at-home mom. Maybe I don't want to cut my hair short and take a man's CEO job, or like what would have typically been a male job in the 50s. Maybe I want, you know, and that's okay. But like, the whole point is, are you being authentic and true to you? And like, that's really the basis for me of all of this. Like, if you're authentically, and I identify with a lot of masculine energy too, just naturally speaking. No one's, you know, 50-50 or 90-10. Like, everyone's got their own balance, but that's just it, is, are you living out your balance? Are you using, and that was a question you asked that I forgot about, you know, are you using masculine traits when and where you want to, or do you feel like you're stuck in an armor of masculinity to protect yourself, and you can't break out of it, even though it feels so tight and unnatural and it's harming your hormones, right? So to me, that's the key, is like, are you living authentic to you, or are you running a conditioned program that you don't even realize, if that makes sense?
Totally. Like, are you working a 60-hour-a-week job plus managing your household in a way that we talk about, that emotional labor, and the idea of like, you know, your partner may be picking up socks, but you're always telling them to do it. And in that sense, you're the project manager of the household, which takes all this mental and emotional energy. And so
Yeah.
you're essentially, you're managing everything, and you're in this manager role, and there's no rest from that. And it's this theme that we see in families. And when you talk about the feminine energy, like when we talk about feminine energy in general, which we've mentioned, like this receptive energy, being in flow. And I think one thing you say in your webinar too is it's really about being in the body and bodily presence. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so to touch on that, like, you know, masculine traits versus feminine traits, it's important that we have access to both of them, regardless of what biological gender you were born as. And again, this is just one way of looking at the world. You know, if the coat fits, wear it. If not, don't worry about it. It's like yin yang theory. So yin being feminine, yang being masculine, and there being a spectrum in between. So feminine would be like, feminine energy is very chaotic. It is like nature growing wild, you know, versus a manicured garden that's very orderly and masculine. Feminine energy is, like you said, very receptive. It's very warm, very welcoming in a lot of cases. It's also healing energy, so like the healer, the intuitive, very emotional energy, being in the body, being connected to our body. It's really about being present, spontaneous, and going with the flow. So the masculine energy is very controlling, like it wants to shift the flow, build the dams, you know, control where this water is going. But feminine is about flowing with that and seeing what life brings you. And I think for women, when you when you let go of the limiting belief that we need to be in control because we're scared and we think that this false sense of control helps, but it doesn't. For women, I think being in more of a state of flow a lot of the time in our day delivers these miraculous results we never would have expected. Whereas if you're controlling everything, you're like this, you know, I talk about going on a trip with my family and like, do you have to follow the itinerary to the minute? That's very masculine. The feminine is like, well, the car broke down. Let's see what's around here. Let's have an adventure. Let's be spontaneous, you know, creative and flow. For women, that actually feels very, like when you can sink into it and let go of the false sense of control, it's very liberating and it's very healthy for our hormones. Yeah, so that, like, that's very much the feminine world. And you can't be that way all the time because we wouldn't make money, we wouldn't run businesses, you know, we wouldn't be able to lead our children when they're little. But there is an important time and place to be in our feminine, especially when we're being creative, creating projects. For me, it's when I'm writing, I have to be in my feminine. When I edit, that's masculine, very detail-oriented, controlling, you know, type of way of being. But to be feminine is like all that creative energy, that robust, sort of chaotic, creative space, if you will.
It's like,
So hopefully that makes sense.
yeah, I'm hearing like lateral energy, which estrogen and oxytocin are but these like lateral brain pathways. And then we have like dopamine, testosterone, more linear, right?
Mm.
It's like, so there's a structure, there's a focus, there's a one track thing. Whereas these other hormonal systems like estrogen, oxytocin are more about like, oh, and then like treat a branch, like, oh, and this goes to this and this goes to that. So when you're there sitting there brainstorming in flow, allowing inspiration to hit, going for a walk in nature, sort of being in your body, and then you get an idea, and an opportunity shows up, and you're responding to opportunities. With
Mm-hmm.
raising children, right? There's no one way to do it. Like, kids don't come with manuals, but a machine does. And so if you're trying to fix a car, there's a way to do it. If you're trying to raise a child, if you're responding to a new situation that maybe nobody's ever seen before, and you're awake to it, and you're allowing it in, and yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah,
that's actually really cool. See, it just continues to fascinate me that like this sort of energetic spiritual world is also supported by a biochemical, physiological, hormonal world too. Like you're saying, the lateralization, and it's true. Like the masculine energy is very like focused, like a bullet going in one direction, whereas the feminine energy is very radiant and like outward, and it's kind of drawing things into it. It's perfect. Raising children is the perfect example. And then like you said, fixing a car. Like men are so good at, when I say men, I mean like hetero masculine identifying men. They're so good at solving problems. Like you give them a problem, they're so good at solving it. Whereas women are really good at just talking and not trying to fix all your problems. What if you just want a sounding board, just being with other women and talking? And, I won't get too much into that, but that's part of the problem we have in society right now, is that we're trying to make our husbands and partners into our best girlfriend, tell them all our problems. But the masculine wants to be there, fix things for you, make you happy, boom. You know what I mean? So it's important to realize those inherent differences to us too.
and like you said, like it stems from, you can start with evolution, biology, and then even myth and religion, and then you get into, now we're in relationship territory, because within the soul there's the animus, anima. So there's the masculine, feminine elements of one's soul, and so somebody could be trying to balance that, or experience the yin yang in all things. So there's always yin and yang in everything. It's all about the balance and how that forms and flows from one thing to another. And then in relationships, similarly, right, there's a bit of polarity that you might find, especially, and we're again going to just narrow this down so that so we have one thing to work off of, but sort of the cisgendered, like heterosexual relationships of a man and a woman, who are in their typical, identifying with their own genders, or their biologically assigned genders. And so this idea of being in polarity, allowing a man to step in his masculine while the women is stepping into her feminine energy, and how that will help relationships and dating. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, that's huge. And like I don't bring this stuff up in the webinar now because I'm any kind of dating or relationship coach, but I bring it up because it's a symptom that I usually ask women about, like, are you having these issues? Because it's all connected, and it's all a sign of us being inauthentically masculine. So what I mean by that is, it's totally cool, like you go to your clinic, I go to my business, like we've got to show up masculine a lot of the time there. You put it perfectly, like when you're out in nature, you get these creative ideas, these downloads, but then to sit and like write out a website page, so it can be very masculine. To design the funnels, very masculine. To put all these softwares in place and send emails to your clients is very masculine. You have to get this done. But the problem is, if we come home and stay stuck in that energy, and then we want to control our man, and we want to control our kids, and I people get caught and they're like, wait, I shouldn't tell my kids what to do. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, do you have to control every little nuanced detail? Like, this is how you wash the dish, this is how you put it away, it's got to be to my specific liking or I'm gonna explode. Like you said, are we project managing? You've got to put your socks away. And that's a very off-putting energy, because if relationships and sexuality is really based on polarity, like you said. So our two quite polarized forces coming together, that makes for really hot, passionate love and sex. And if it's sort of lukewarm, that's usually, if there's no connection there at all anymore, that's usually a sign that one or both of you have reverted to being an inauthentic energy. And we might come home and think we want to control everything, but it doesn't lead to the long-term result that we want. Like, I know for myself, I wanted a passionate, sexualized, hot relationship. I don't want to get married and feel like I'm just living with a best friend and we're roommates. I've had that life before. I don't want it again. So, when I'm in my state of control, and that's very much who I was being in my past relationships, that's what it leads to. It turns men off. It feminizes or emasculates men. Or, they might be manly men, and they love you so much that they have to suppress themselves to stay with us, because that's the only way that they can. You can't have these two masculine competing energies. It's like two alpha males butting heads. So they have to suppress who they really are to allow you to be this fake version of yourself, if that makes sense. So I might have thought in the moment that I wanted to control all these variables and be stuck in that energy, but it didn't lead to any of the life or the outcomes or the health that I wanted. And now I'm much less in control. I don't project manage. Yeah, he leaves socks on the floor, but it's like, it's not the end of the effing world. But we have a fantastic sex life. Is it worth there being a sock on the floor every other day? Yeah, it's totally fine. You know what I mean? I'm way happier not being a micromanager. I can say that.
And nobody wants to be controlled. Like, I think, and I think even if we're thinking archetypally, it's not even a healthy masculine that controls.
No.
It's sort of like Scar from The Lion King, like the bad king, right? It's the bad king energy. It's the authoritarian, authoritative, sort of tyrannical energy. And so if we're embodying that, it's not only inauthentic, it doesn't feel good. And it's actually, you do discuss these archetypes, and they're all present in The Lion King.
That's movie for archetypes, eh?
So good. Yeah, can you go just quickly tell us about this? So we have, the good king, the bad king, the naive masculine energy, like the little boy, Simba, and then the anima.
Yeah.
The anima.
Yeah, it's such a good movie for these archetypes. And it's funny because I've been talking about it for years, and then you sent me a Jordan Peterson clip where he talks about Nala as the anima. And I'm like, frig, it's so perfect. He was onto it as well this whole time. But so, and this is just looking at masculine more than feminine, but you have like we call it divine masculine, embodied masculine, sacred masculine. Just, it's the highest version of this energy. And that would be Mufasa. Like, he's this great king, everyone loves him, he takes care of his people. And that's truly divine masculine energy. Is, it protects those who are weaker. It stands for justice and fairness and rightness. There's a sense of integrity. Think of like a good leader, whoever that is for us. That's like your divine masculine energy. And then Scarface, his brother, is like the in the webinar, I think I call it like damage masculine energy, or like hurt. They've been wounded in some way. They've never fully come into themselves. And so that looks like, he just wants power. He just wants control. Like you said, tyrannical, authoritative, just wanting to control things. It's not for the greater good, it's for a personal gain. And I think that's somewhere we get stuck as society too, is when we hear people talk about the goodness of masculine and that we need good men. And there's some feminists who are like, no, we got to squash all masculinity. I've met people like this. It's a weird thing. I don't think a lot of people are like this anymore, but it's not true. Like, those qualities that they're alluding to are a wounded masculine quality. That's not a true divine masculine quality. And then you get Simba, who's like the immature masculine. So he's avoiding responsibilities. He's seeing Hakuna Matata in the forest. He doesn't want to come back and be king and help his people. And that's, like, I talk about us millennial women, we were raised by our mothers to be more manly, but they also emasculated their sons in the process. And we are now, like, our dating pool largely consists of these emasculated sons who show up like Simba, like, just not really stepping into responsibility, don't really know how to pursue a woman, are not really looking to set up family. They're not in that like grounded, rooted, I want to be in integrity, I want to be a true leader space. They might be in their 30s and not have a good job yet, still be living in their mom's basement. be dating around and sleeping around a lot, and not really looking to honor a woman and cherish a woman and create a sacred relationship with a woman. And these are a lot of the guys that we date, especially when we're in our masculine state. They are drawn to us because we remind them of their mothers, right? That's what they know. So that would be Simba. And then Nala is like the divine feminine and the anima, like you probably know way more about anima than I do. But it's like this archetype of a woman that a man has in his mind that he will slay for. Like, it is the woman, and I'm sure all of us have had, I've dated men who I knew they secretly loved some other woman they grew up with and they would kill for her. I wasn't their person. And then I've dated men where I am their anima, and like, it is powerful how this feminine energy will call a man to step powerfully into his manhood. So that's a big thing that if we can embrace our feminine energy and our authentic feminine energy, we actually call forth kings and men who might not have been kings before this moment, because they suddenly see the value. They're like, I want her. I want that. She makes me feel like a better man. She makes me feel like I could be somebody else and be the person I always envisioned. And they will step powerfully up into their masculinity in that moment. I think to a degree, my partner has been like that. I think I saw him for who he really has been under the surface, and I refuse to see him any other way. TV shows, like I was just watching Lucifer, alludes to this. Like, there's this one female character who sees Lucifer, the devil, for the goodness that he can be, because he's actually an angel. And then there's his ex-girlfriend Eve, who sees him for like the sinful devil she wants to keep him as, but he wants to be that angel, that powerful divine masculine man. So that's the power of the anima to my awareness, and that's the power of the divine feminine. Does that kind of fit with the whole anima thing? I don't know.
And as you're talking, I'm also thinking about how that could be an individualized internal system. Like, we can have our like, within any individual soul or psyche, there's the anima and the animus, and part of our animus, like, we can internalize that authoritative tyrannical king and have this really strong inner critic that's beating us down, that's chaining us, that's oppressing our soul, like the feminine part of our soul, that's creative and open and connecting, and that inspires the divine masculine within us, within a woman, within a man. And you look at that, you're talking about the relationship context, this dual energy between two people. And then you can even look at society, and is maybe the population stepping into more feminine energy as a population-wide society. And we talk about this with coronavirus, where everyone is called to rest. Obviously, not everybody's in the same situation. A lot of people are under a huge amount of stress right now. But because a lot of our systems are shut down, a lot of us are in a situation where we're resting more, and the structures have fallen, and is stepping into more of a feminine energy as a society. Is that going to call the masculine part of society to become more divine, more kingly, like standing up for what's right, and it's interesting, right? Because these two powers can really influence the other. And
yeah, they give space for each other, whereas because they're polarized. So if I'm being feminine, I give space to men to be masculine. Whereas if I'm being inauthentic and trying to control, then I'm basically emasculating all the men in the room. And I'm like, I know how to lead better than you do. Shut up. I'm going to control things. And then you see their tail between their legs, and they just kind of cower away. I know certainly my brothers and cousins get like that. If women are being controlling. Whereas if you can step back and give space, and again, I'm not saying women can't lead, and many of us do, but it might be more natural in certain situations to be like, all right, let's let the king do what he's really biologically, hormonally geared to doing. You really see their power call forth. They're not, I don't want to talk badly about my family in any way. It's just, I see this dynamic between my mom and brother a lot, but like, if she is around, she's like doing all the things for him, like making his resume, sending it off to jobs, getting him interviews. That's emasculating, because it's like saying, you're not a sovereign being. I don't believe in you. I don't believe you can do this on your own. This is like maybe when he was 25 or younger. And she doesn't mean it that way, but she feels safe being in control. right? She feels safe controlling all the variables in her mind. But it emasculates him, and then as a result, he's like, well, what do I do? Okay, I guess I just show up to these interviews. I feel like a loser. He's not being his full empowered self. Whereas being in your feminine, you could be like, well, you want a job? What do you think you could do next? Talk to me about it. Tell me what you're thinking. It allows that man or that person to be a sovereign being and choose a solution for themselves. And so then you see, like, for instance, my parents now go to Florida for half the year. And when they're away, when my mom's away, my brother, like, he steps powerfully into his masculine energy. And I'm like, who is this guy? You know, he's becoming a better leader, a better family man, a better father. And he only does that when they're away, and he doesn't feel squashed and impinged upon. So yeah, I do think maybe that is what's happening energetically, is we're being given a chance to rest. And the men need to rest too, and men need to use feminine energy too, just like we use masculine at work. They need to use it, and I think they get access to it through us a lot of the time. But yeah, you're right. Maybe this will be an opportunity for us to see what we're individually gifted at and stop trying to play all the roles, and let them be sovereign beings who can really contribute and you know, do what they're really good at doing too.
Yeah, it's like I'm hearing, like, to allow space, and first, you know, what arises from that is this empowerment, you know. So when your brother is given space, this natural sense of personal power starts to arise, and he starts to take action, he starts to take on responsibility. But again, like, if he's being controlled and told that what he's doing is wrong, you just kind of, like, I think of my nonna, like, I'd be washing dishes, you did it wrong, so she would redo it. So it's like, well, then I'm just not going to do it because you're going to do it anyways. This idea of, like, empowering the person, letting kids tie their own shoes, whether they're a boy or a girl or whatever gender they are, letting them tie their own shoes, even if it's wrong, to just, okay, like, this, you're taking on this responsibility, and you're giving your a chance to make mistakes, right? Because if we're in control, wanting to control everything, we have no tolerance for other people's mistakes or our own mistakes.
Yeah.
That kills creativity, and it kills power, because if you're already suppressing your own creativity because you might make a mistake, and that's what creativity is all about. It's about putting things into the world that fail, and then, okay, that doesn't work, let's try something else, right? And then from that we get innovation, we get new, we start to enter flow, and new things arise, and new solutions to problems that weren't solved before, right? How does one, so when we talk about, so how does one step into feminine energy? Like, are there practices you can do? Like, what is, because I actually struggle with this, and I'm thinking about this, where I, you know, and I think I may have texted you one day and been like, Erica, actually, this is an interesting story. I was like, Erica, is it feminine to order a second lunch and just watch Netflix all day? And you were like, well, if you're honoring your body. And what happened that afternoon was, all of a sudden this surge of inspiration occurred, and then I started doing all these things. And it was like just allowing myself to respond to whatever desire I had, and trust that I'm not going to lie on the couch forever. It's a moment where I need to do this for whatever reason, whether it makes sense or not, whether I should be working out or not, whether I should be productive or not. It was like this allowance of something to occur. And then from that arose the actual thing that I wanted to do, which was be productive or get certain things done. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really magical, because the feminine is all about your intuition and honoring your body. And if you're intuitively being told to eat more and rest more, you know, maybe there's something to that. But it's also really hard to trust. Like, I find if we've been conditioned, it's hard to trust that, because we're more used to disciplining ourselves, which is very masculine, and it has its time and place. Like, if you need to start working out, you got to be disciplined and show up at the gym 3 times a week. But there's something to be said, like you mentioned, of trusting your intuition, trusting that you won't just be a lump on the couch for the rest of your life. Your body needs and wants something in this moment. And, you know, I don't know, this maybe goes back to the basis of why both of us got into natural medicine. There's an inherent trust in the organism that it knows what it needs to heal and rebalance itself. And that's much different than, like, a patriarchal society and their approach of, like, we have to control and dominate every single aspect. So yeah, you were talking about how does one get into the feminine. I talk about 7 different keys in my webinar that I've identified over the past 4 years of really studying this. And I spent a year, I have to say, in the Embodied Feminine Women Institute with a coach called Jordana Toccacelli, and she really made a difference in my life. It's a relationship course, but it really made a difference in my life in all these things. And so from that work and from what I've seen in working with clients, I've identified these 7 things, and there could be more for all I know, but there's these 7 things that really bring us into embodying our feminine energy. So, you know, I talk about being in your body more, honoring the body. There are specific practices. So that could be different for everyone. It could be doing breath work. It could be having orgasms. Like, that's really a surge in popularity right now, is all these sex coaches and sex courses are coming out, and women learning to be okay with masturbating again or ever.
Sex witches. It's like the way that you manifest money through orgasm.
Yes, it's all connected. So yes, sex is huge. And I mean, that's something I talk about in the webinar too. Another symptom of our conditioning is if our vagina feels dead inside. So like, is our vagina numb? That usually comes from a suppression from our conditioning to be like men, or that sex is bad. It's all connected to this. So just to kind of like, because we haven't spoke about this, women were dominated and controlled by men for thousands of years to control our reproductivity, to build the armies that we suddenly needed when we became river societies, and to control the offspring. So like you said at the beginning, we didn't always used to know who the father was of a child, because in most tribes it's normal to be polyamorous. Like, most women have 3 to 4 lovers, maybe more. So they didn't know who the father was. Every child was treated like every man is his father in the tribe, which I think is a beautiful and noble way to be. Not that you have to be poly, but anyways, so their fertility got controlled, and then that's where you see this women being controlled into people pleasers and, you know, subservient, and sex is bad, and, you know, only have sex with your husband and be controlled, and only
Don't enjoy it.
Yeah, don't enjoy it. You're a slut if you do, and you're disgusting and a terrible person. Like, there's so much conditioning that we have. It's really, really sad. And that's something I talk about in the webinar too, is there are blocks. There's these conditioned blocks to healing that have to be worked through as well in order to take on these 7 embodiment keys. So it's not just doing the practices, it's also getting that junk out of the way, if you will. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not enough to eat healthy foods if you're also eating a Snickers bar every 2 hours. Like, you have to get the junk out of the way so you can heal. But yeah, so we talked about embodiment and sex magic and that sort of thing. There's also learning how to receive, learning how to express gratitude, learning how to communicate in a feminine way, which most of us don't even communicate nicely in a masculine way. So just learning to communicate with sovereignty and admiration for other humans, period, is a good skill to have. I feel like I'm missing something, but I can't remember what it is. Honoring your inner sacred masculine. So not abandoning that, not swinging the pendulum so far in the other direction that you're pure chaos, but honoring your masculine side too. So having structures that serve you in your life. I feel like there's another one that I can't remember, but it's all in the webinar.
It's almost like I think what you mentioned is something about, like, you know, having a bit of a schedule to allow there to be some sort of structure that you can feel safe in, so that you can allow yourself to feel free. And I think that's really great, right? It's like, so how can I trust my body to, like, hang out on the couch all day? Well, one of the things that can help me trust that process is maybe to know what my to-do list is, and that it'll get done in its own time, but I can tell if I'm on track, rather than having this, like, you know, even as a student or entrepreneur, there's always something you could be doing. And so there's sometimes this inherent guilt in resting, right? And, you know, and for many other jobs, you don't just have to be a student or entrepreneur, but there's this, like, kind of looming guilt all the time. And so but to be able to schedule a play day, which we talk about in one of my business masterminds, is like having time off, whether it's like quarterly or yearly. In this day, I'm going to release all mental and emotional obligations and just play and allow ideas to come through and and to do whatever I want, and know that, but that I'll also be productive during other times, or that things will get done because I've scheduled that or organized that and deferred to this sort of external system I've created to take care of those structures. There's this course I took. I think it was it was sort of like a promotion for a bigger course, but it was this free workshop, and it was all about the feminine energy. And I always talk about this story because it was just such an interesting experience, and I think about it all the time. And they had us do a few exercises, and one of them was to walk around imagining an article of clothing that to you resembled masculine, and then sort of like gender neutral, and then feminine. And then to walk around the room imagining that you're wearing that piece of clothing, and to just observe, what your energy feels like, what your gait feels like. So my masculine, quote unquote, clothing were these work boots, and I was just kind of clomping and like heavy and just didn't feel authentic. And my gender neutral was like a red scarf. And I actually felt very much how I feel when I'm just walking the streets of Toronto, like this sort of just neutral sort of person without much of an identity, without much of a bodily presence. And then the feminine article of clothing was this, I don't know why I pick these things. It's just an intuitive process. It was this flowing blue dress, and I'm sort of like flouncing and free and felt just good in my body. And she also had us do, and it was very interesting. And she had us do this other exercise where it was almost like a meditation, dropping into the womb bowl or the womb space. And there was this distinction between the head cloud, which is not even being in the head, it's the head cloud. It's all the nonsense of like this and that, and just like the mindlessness and the rumination and all the things, and I got to do this and I got to do that, and blah, 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 blah. And then being in the womb space is like dropping into the pelvic bowl, sort of that space inside your body below the belly button, and just being in that space. And sometimes I actually would practice that with patients. If I'm listening to a patient and my mind is and this is a really bad place to be in a clinical encounter, like your mind is going into like, what am I going to say next, or what am I going to do? And you're no longer present. I'll sometimes internally stop that process, drop into the womb space, and just receive what the person's saying. And then what I say next is like just a natural result of responding in that moment. You're fully listening, and then you're just saying, maybe reflecting back, maybe asking for more information, maybe just saying something that's actually, you're kind of like, whoa, that was an interesting thing I just said, good for me, or whatever. But it's not coming from the head cloud. And then there were just different stories that she shared, the woman running this workshop, about that, and how there's a woman in a board meeting, and male dominated, probably some sort of business industry. She's in a board meeting, she's leading the meeting, and everybody comes in, all these these sort of masculine males, they come in, they're talking, they're ignoring her, they're in their own thing. And instead of trying to grab control and tell them, everybody be quiet and listen to me, she describes it as she just sat there, dropped into her womb space, and the room just, everyone settles and everyone's quiet and just looking at her. And it was this idea of claiming feminine power, and I was like, yeah, so the womb space, but you in your webinar talk about bodily presence and how good that actually feels, and how that helps us step out of stress, and maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you mentioned about like she didn't try to control the room, because and this is kind of what's happening in our relationships today, for a lot of us in hetero relationships, is men do not want to have sex with other men. They want to have sex with their woman, and they want her to be a woman. So it's the polarity, right? And so not just sex, but like men respond powerfully to feminine energy because they need to be nourished by it. It's their access to the divine. Not to get too spiritual, but it is their access to a greater life beyond the here and now. And so it's just interesting that she dropped into her feminine, and that's what the men responded to. They didn't respond to more control and domination, because they're doing that all day long. They're all competing to be alpha all the time in some way, or they're beta and they're competing amongst themselves in another way. But so instead of her just jumping in with the dogs and trying to chew their heads off, she called them to their higher self and to their masculinity. And that's the power, like what you're getting at there, is that's, feminine is equally powerful, but it's different. So it doesn't seek to fight and compete the way that the men all would for alpha status. And you can be an alpha feminine female too, and that would be an example of one. And it's so rare that it's so powerful when we witness it, because we're like, holy crap, she didn't have to be a man to hold power in that moment. She got to be fully embodied as a woman and be so powerful, the most powerful person in the room. So that's really, I love this kind of stuff. I find this fascinating. And part of the blocks too that women face is like, oh, I don't want to be feminine because it means being weak and meek and not speaking up. And that's not at all what it means. So people are afraid to step into their femininity, but that was a perfect example. And yeah, so your question was, how do we embody it? I think that's what you asked, right?
Mm-hmm.
Embodying them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I really talked about one just little exercise you can do is starting to become aware of, like, what does the fabric feel like on my body? What does this necklace feel like in my hands? You know, what am I smelling right now? What am I seeing? Like, show me the beauty around me. Starting to, like you said, drop out of the head space and into the body space, into the womb space. There are tons of free meditations on this you can do too, that, like when I first did that 1 year embodied feminine woman course, I had to do a feminine meditation every time before I went out on a date, because I had to learn how to come back into my body instead of be stuck in my head. So you can definitely like Google feminine meditations or embodiment meditations on YouTube. Those are amazing. I'm trying to think what else. Like sex and sexual healing are so big. I haven't really got into a lot of talking about that yet, but there's so many coaches out there that talk about, you know, when you can start waking up the vagina internally, that's really embodying. And that's what's sad to me, is a lot of us are, my friend Shannon put it as, we're walking around decapitated. We're just heads. And to create polarity in our life and in our relationships, we have to be a full being, especially with our man, because that's what he's drawn to. He's in his head all day. He's decapitated all day. He wants to come home to a fiery, alive, embodied woman. And it's sad because we walk around completely cut off. We're all in the rumination, like you said. And we're not in our bodies. And I think sex is, whether it's with yourself or a partner, is one of the most powerful ways to learn about and come into your own body. So definitely, and I don't talk much about it in the webinar, but I do talk about it in my program, is, you know, using that as a technique to access the feminine. But there's other things too. So like that pelvic exercise you did is a perfect example. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so, and I think we started off this conversation with that, with the hunter. You know, the hunter might be wounded, but needs to carry on, push through, ignore, cut off. Like, this whole, like, you know, masculine initiation is like jump in the pit of fire ants that are, you know, excruciating pain and just overcoming that somehow. And the feminine energy, or maybe the female path, is to be accessing the body, to be nurturing the body, to be kind with one's body, to allow nature to come through, to follow its process, to flow, to be intuitive about your body, like intuitive eating and responding to the desire to rest, and to loosen up that inner critic that we have. So the inner critic that can damage our own psyche, and the outer critic that can take the place in a relationship, right, where you start criticizing your partner and emasculating them or just empowering them. And yeah, and I think that's really interesting, is just to this sensation of like, what's actually happening in my body. And a lot of my patients, and a lot of this is a symptom of trauma and PTSD, but a lot of my patients will say, like, I don't feel my body. I never know what's going on in my body. And, you know, when we are, as naturopaths or health coaches, we ask questions about, you know, what's your digestion like? Are you bloated? And patients are like, I don't think so. I think I'm okay. And I'll do an abdominal exam, and we do something where we do percussion, right? Like you're tapping the first knuckle on your middle finger over the abdomen, and you hear this hollow resonance, like you're tapping on a drum, because there's a lot of gas in the intestines. And you're like, oh, looks like you are bloated, but we're unaware. And a lot of us are not, we don't have language around how our bodies feel, and maybe I haven't been really taught to connect with them in that way, right? Because we're supposed to be pushing through, ignoring. When we were in school, we were told if you have to pee, wait till the break. So we'd be like holding our pee, it's just like these kind of things that you're like, we're not taught to finish your plate, even if you're stuffed full. So you stop recognizing what hunger feels like or fullness feels like. Even apps that tell you if you need to eat. I saw this app that you breathe into, this device, and it tells you if it's time for a snack, because I guess it's measuring your ketones or your glucose or whatever in your breath, probably ketones in your breath. And I'm like, well, we developed over hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, these hunger systems that tell us if we need to eat. But now we need to defer to an app for this information. So it's just very interesting how this society and the civilization has taught us to ignore our bodies and to defer this internal intuition to an external structure. Even the medical system you mentioned will be like, okay, you defer to an outside authority, which traditionally was a masculine person or masculine authority, that will tell you what your body needs or what to take or what's wrong with your body and how to fix it and this kind of thing. And yeah,
it's so fascinating you're bringing this up, because like when I talked about being a minor in medical anthropology, it looked at medicalization and how medical technologies change things. And we've only had this form of medicine for not even 150 years. It's very new compared to our 250,000 years of existence prior, right? But like, that's what they do. Like Michel Foucault, all of his work is about how, we started overriding the patient's experience. So it used to be very story-based. So you'd go to the healer, you would tell them your story, and then they would help you. But then now they would show up, put on a gown, just be a number in the hospital, take x-rays, do blood tests. We don't care what your story is. This is what the things say. So it's the quashing of intuition and the quashing of the patient's story, right? And their holistic picture. And just like you said, deferring to like whether it's an app or an x-ray or whatever. Not that these things don't have value, they have a ton of value, but when it completely gets rid of the story and the person involved, you're just talking to walking symptoms instead of a human being. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right. Or you're just talking to a liver, right? If you're a gastroenterologist, there isn't this full person, this full system, and that you're a person in their entire life and context who has a liver and a brain and a heart and like different hormonal systems and isn't just an intestine, and this I think is one of a comment that lots of patients will make, I feel like things are connected, but no one's really connecting anything. I'm like, well, of course things are connected. You are one system, right? If you throw plastic bags into a river, you don't just have river plus plastic bags. There's a response of the ecosystem to become disimbalanced, perhaps. Like, so it's going to affect the kind of fish that are growing, or you're changing something in this ecosystem. It's going to change everything in some way. So if your liver's not doing well, nothing will be doing well, right? Like everything will somehow be affected by that dysfunction of one organ, right?
And it's funny to me because like the women were hit the hardest by this process of medicalization. So many things that are just natural for women, medicalization means taking something natural and labeling it as a disease process. So childbirth being a big one, right? It was treated as a disease process. You were given chloroform, you were knocked out, you delivered your baby unconscious. So it's interesting that, modern medicine was formed on the basis of suppressing women, medicalizing them. And that's what it's done. It's killed our feminine energy in our own health and in our own bodies. Like, we don't trust our own natural processes. We don't trust our own intuition. We don't trust our own story. We're deferring to a structure outside of ourselves, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's like, well, I just need to go and get this checked out, or which, I mean, fair enough, because we can't all go through the 8 years of medical school and pre-medical education that you would need to develop that language and the jargon and the understanding of what could be happening. But but we also are experts on our own bodies. And I think I saw a meme where it's like, you spent 20 minutes learning this in medical school. I spent 45 years learning about this by living it you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, well, that is what medicine used to be. Most of the healers used to be female, and you would take your story to them, explain it, and they would sit and be with you and understand it, So you're the expert at you, but you're still seeking out someone who's the expert at whatever it is, the use of healing herbs, botanicals, perhaps. But never were they overriding you. Whereas in this model that has come about, maybe not in more recent years, but the majority of it was the doctor was telling you what's wrong with you. They were overriding your story, overriding your authority. Again, it goes back to that control piece, whereas the feminine is just being with what's so, and then aiming to rebalance it. Yeah, that's super interesting.
Right.
But one thing I forgot to say that we were talking about, you were talking about structured play days, just to go back to that for a quick sec, and being in our bodies. And then this is what I mean by honoring the sacred masculine, is like you said, can you design a schedule with free time in it so you can go and play? And I have to force myself to do that, because otherwise I'll be stuck in my head. I was working on my online stuff all week, but I was like, nope, it's a long weekend. I'm going to take the whole weekend off. I'm going to force myself to not do work, because I'm in my masculine. I just want to keep going. But it was wonderful to just do nothing and recuperate and show up on Tuesday like more energized than ever and ready to get back at it. So yeah, I think it's honoring the structure giving room for the feminine to be, and then being in our bodies when we can.
Like I heard a really great metaphor about this that sums it up really well. Is like the feminine energy is the ocean. It's chaotic. It can be violent. That's not the word I was looking for, but it's powerful. It flows. It's all encompassing. It's magnetic. And the masculine energy is the ocean floor, which holds it all.
Yeah, that beautiful structure.
And so if we think about, creating structures in our schedule, you have these time blocks, and that's sort of the ocean floor holding whatever you fill those time structures with. And I think in some ways that can be, and it's actually interesting because our schedule could be Mufasa or it could be Scar. And so your schedule, could be a divine masculine schedule saying, yes, Talia, you get these 2 hours to play. This is when you're going to see patients. And it could be really, beautiful and stand for my highest good. Or my schedule can be a horrible thing to look at that I want to avoid because it's criticizing me, it's implicitly controlling me. And so I think sometimes when we talk with patients about schedules and and actually one of my examples is the gym, where I will look on the gym schedule. Okay, I'm going to go to yoga at 7, put in the calendar, and it just happens. And I just show up and I just allow them to lead me. And then I can just be in my body. I don't have to think about what I'm doing, and it's great. And it happens, and it's part of my routine. And so, yeah, it's interesting how you can apply this to all of these different layers, right? You can talk about anthropology, you can talk about society, and this duality that might exist within all things, which I think, ancient medical systems have identified as yin yang energy, or, yeah.
I know, it's so fascinating. I love the layers of it. Yeah, no, it's really, there's something I was going to say, but I totally forgot what it was. Yeah, it's really, really, really fascinating though. Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if you need to get to lunch, but I feel like we can talk forever, but maybe we should get it off, and we'll definitely we'll schedule another time to flow. Absolutely. But I wanted to ask you, so how can people, so I'm going to provide links for people to find you and to access the webinar and whatever else, but is there anything you'd like to leave off with, or anything you want to end with, or invite people to visit?
Oh yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. Because you were talking about how the schedule can either be like a divine masculine Mufasa type structure or a Scarface sort of wounded structure. But really, that's like, if I could just impart one thing, that is it, is, are we walking around in a wounded state where we're constantly criticizing ourselves, harming ourselves, ignoring our bodies, regardless if you identify as masculine, feminine, or whatever balance in between? Or are you able to work through your blocks? Are you able to heal those things that are in your way so that you can reclaim who you actually are? Because it's not about becoming someone else. It's actually about undoing the conditioning that's been done to us. And it's happened to men, it's happened to women, it's happened to everyone, I would say, that's walked on this earth. And that would be my most important thing, is finding a way for all of us to decondition and work through our limiting thoughts, limiting beliefs, and really truly, yeah, heal on a deep psychological level, because then the physical, everything just falls into place after that, if we can access those core blocks. And that's what I was really getting at in the webinar too, is if we stay acting like men, we try to take on our health like men, and we try to be super rigid and structured, super disciplined, but in the end it just ends up hurting us, because it overrides our intuition and our own authority, and or it burns us out and stresses us out even more, right? Like orthorexia is being so obsessed with your health that you burn out even more. So yeah, that would be my hope for people, is whatever way that is for you to access a method of healing to work through those blocks, and regardless of what energy you identify with. But yeah, if people are interested, I got into this in more depth in the masterclass, the webinar. It's about 90 minutes. And yeah, I guess we'll throw up a link. It's just on my website, erica-robinson.com, and you can grab that for free and learn more about all of these juicy things we've been talking about.
Yeah, this is so great. Yeah. And I think, really at the bottom of this conversation is this idea of exhaustion and burnout, which we haven't really called out until you just said it. But I think that there's an epidemic going on of burnout among women, particularly, I think, but also among men too. And this idea of maybe stepping into a more feminine energy that polarizes this energy that has pushed us towards burnout is at the source or at the core of healing all of these different things that we're noticing. So it's cool.
Yeah, like, because that's what we're obsessed with, right? Is root cause type stuff. And I think that's a big root cause in our society right now. So.
Yeah, we're always trying to get as deep as possible. Like, what's the deepest root? Oh, it comes from it comes from 2 million years ago when we were first emerging from whatever primordial species we became. Yeah. How deep can you go?
Was tainted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not just settling at like, oh, it's because your carb to fat ratio is off. It's like, no, it's evolution. Like this is where it comes from. Yeah, it's archetypal. It's within the deep roots of the soul, the anima animus complex. So exactly. Such a fascinating conversation. I have to admit, I did feel a little bit because I don't feel that it's in my zone of genius or expertise to address issues with gender. And so I did feel worried about not having the language or maybe, using sort of like a heteronormative context to have this conversation. But I do think that this is a deeper conversation than that. And like you said, there's a particular patient that you have in mind when you're addressing these things. Like, you're seeing a problem that you're addressing, and not everybody is going to identify or have that problem, and not everyone's going to need your solution for whatever's going on with them. This is definitely not a broad brush that we're using to paint, but this idea of the yin yang energy in all things is very interesting, and how we've been in a very yang state for so long. And perhaps a lot of us need to step more into a yin.
A little more being, a little less doing,
Totally. Yeah, that's great. Okay.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.